In your opinion, was this weapon unloaded correctly? Hi everyone, as always, I'm Vlad Sparastoria. I've been working as a shooting instructor for years, and I often find myself in situations where people handling firearms like this one don't treat them with the right attitude. Unloading a firearm, making it safe, might seem like a pretty simple and trivial thing, especially to more experienced shooters, but the devil is in the details. But instead of simply showing you the steps someone might take to unload a firearm, I prefer to fully explain what I mean when I talk about firearms safety culture, or actually a general culture of safety. When I talk about a culture of safety with firearms, I mean something that goes far beyond a series of mere mechanical actions, like unloading the weapon or putting it in a safe condition. The culture of safety is how we think, how we approach this issue. And the first big mistake that many people make is not having enough humility. When we say things like the unloaded gun, or rather the one you think is unloaded that kills you, it's not really a message that I direct to beginners. It's more of a message that I would direct to veterans of this world, because I see a lot of mistakes with firearms in my job every day, both from beginners. I can justify them up to a certain point, but especially from people who shouldn't be making mistakes because they should have a culture of safety. The attitude of it won't happen to me is a deeply wrong attitude. Let me give you a practical example of what I mean by culture. Years ago, I was shooting with someone who was not at all new to the world of firearms. He was firing his shots, bang, 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 bang. At a certain point, he finished shooting, the bolt was still closed, and this person turned around to go back to his shooting position. We were in a quarry. I told him, wait, why are you turning around with that gun? Unload it. And the answer was, well, no, but I know this magazine doesn't work for me. It doesn't lock open, but don't worry, I counted the rounds. The problem wasn't so much that he didn't unload the weapon. The problem was the answer, the damn answer. The damn answer, that won't happen to me. I counted the shots, trust me, there's no way I made a mistake. Well, no, my friend. From that day on, I started avoiding this person like the plague, because that's not the right attitude to have towards firearms. Mistakes with these things shouldn't happen, but mistakes do happen. What we can do is have the humility to recognize these mistakes. Accept that we made them and do everything possible not to make them again in the future. This is firearms culture and firearm safety. My first piece of advice, absolutely for all of you, is to be humble. You know that feeling when you're holding something, you're a bit distracted, it falls and it breaks? Well, you could have held it tighter, you could have done it, but you didn't. And that's exactly how accidents happen. In hindsight, but also when it happens to someone else, it's easy to judge. It happens to me a lot, for example, when I shoot with the local police here at the Legnano shooting range. Sometimes people, some officers, follow the firearm unloading procedure very well, while maybe everyone is shooting at their targets together. But when I have them shoot individually, and I do it on purpose, for example, to put them under a bit of pressure just to see what happens in that moment, they often start making mistakes. And it's easy to judge from the outside. But if you've ever done a test like that, or even a music recital when you were in school, or any kind of test where people were watching you and you had to do something, you really understand the tension you can feel and how easy it is to make mistakes. So all the procedures we have to deal with, we need to think about them for these situations, because bad habits will come out exactly when it's the worst time. If I have a bad habit because of a poor safety culture, when I need to do things correctly the most, I assure you, you will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. Before we actually look at the correct unloading procedure and try to analyze its small details, remember something very important. This pistol is an FN 509. It works actually like most semi-automatic pistols work, but different guns can work in different ways. Even if you are a firearms enthusiast, have the humility to look up or read the manual for your new firearm when you buy it. I didn't just take this weapon and start shooting right away. I read the manual. even though, honestly, the manual didn't teach me anything new. I still read the manual because it could have contained information and details about how this weapon works that were potentially different from what I already knew. And if with weapons like these, for example, those that have a removable magazine or a slide stop, the unloading procedure is very similar or the same for each, there might be weapons that don't have these features. There are weapons that don't have a slide stop or weapons that don't have a removable magazine. In pistols, it's relatively rare, although not impossible. But for example, in pump-action shotguns or bolt-action rifles, I don't have a removable magazine. There are various solutions to properly unload that weapon, which may vary from one weapon to another. So first of all, you need to know your weapon and be careful because the unloading procedures can vary depending on the firearm action you're dealing with. If we want to unload this weapon, what do? Well, someone might say to take out the magazine. Wait a moment, stop for a second. Let's think about it for a moment. Right now I have a loaded weapon. And do you know what the problem is with doing what I'm about to tell you? That I'm talking to the camera. The first thing you should do when you approach a firearm and you don't know if it's loaded or unloaded. Now, we know that, but we have to treat every weapon as if it's loaded and remember a concept called no talking during the procedure. If you're chatting or if you're distracted by something else, you might skip some fundamental steps in this procedure. So first of all, let's stay focused on what we're doing. Also, always remember not to keep your finger on the trigger and to keep the weapon pointed at the target. In case you make a mistake, if the shot that shouldn't go off does go off, at least it will go in a safe direction. So, with this weapon, now that it has a round in the chamber, I'm going to unload it. How do I do it? First, I'll do it and then we'll analyze it piece by piece. The details are important. The first fundamental step, right now I'm aiming at the target. I'm thinking about unloading the weapon and not chatting with my friend at the range, is removing the ammunition source, in this case the magazine. And remember that there are weapons that might not have removable magazines. Let's remove it. We then obviously need to remove the round that's left in the chamber. Right now the weapon is not in a safe condition, and if I pull the trigger, this weapon will fire. How can we do this? We can simply pull back the bolt. I prefer to do it this way simply because it's more convenient not to lose the round somewhere. Sometimes if you're in a quarry, in tall grass or other places like that, you might lose it. And you understand that's not really pleasant, even from a legal point of view. The move I make is to cup my hand over the ejection port. But at the same time, with the thumb of my strong hand, I push up the slide stop lever. So the slide stays locked open and the round stays in my hand. We are not done yet because we still need to check that we've actually removed a round from the chamber and that we've removed the magazine. How do we do that? We can do that simply by looking inside the firearm. We look carefully inside the chamber, the barrel, and also carefully where the magazine should be. Let's make sure that both have been removed. Skipping these steps is very easy. I see a lot of people doing this operation very quickly, too quickly to actually realize that these two parts have been removed. Another piece of advice from me, since you might not see well, you're stressed, it's dark, especially for those who use weapons for self-defense reasons. You can't see because your glasses are fogged up and so on. What about touch? Put your finger inside the barrel to check that there's nothing there. Put your finger inside the magazine well to make sure you've actually removed it. However, the safety procedure isn't finished yet because we need to close the weapon and store it safely. For example, in a container or in your own holster. How do we do that? Let's close the slide. And here is probably the most serious mistake that shooters make. A serious mistake that can lead to disastrous consequences. A serious mistake, which I'll tell you about now. What happened right here 2 months ago, luckily no one got hurt. but it will make you understand how a series of mechanical habits we fall into can lead to disastrous consequences. You see, many people right now in this situation would do what's called a test trigger press, just to confirm that there's nothing in the barrel and to release the trigger mechanisms. There's nothing more dangerous than a badly done test trigger press. You might say, but how? Can you mess up a test shot? Isn't it just pulling the trigger? Actually, no, the devil is in the details, because if you noticed earlier, I aimed at my target and pulled the trigger. I fired, I didn't do a test trigger press. I aimed at the target with the intention of hitting it. Why is that? A few months ago, a security guard had finished his test and was putting his rounds back into the magazine. As you know, or if you don't know, at TSN shooting ranges, we are the ones who give the rounds to the security guards, and they have to fire all the rounds we give them. There are actually two different laws that require this behavior. So the guards usually set aside their own rounds and then put them back into the magazine. This person was already handling the gun without much confidence. At that moment, I was standing next to this security guard, sweeping up the shell casings. Also, because he had finished shooting, there was no one else. And what happened? I hear this noise. I go over and say, "Do you know you just chambered a round?" Meanwhile, the person had already put the weapon away. I point this out. So, wait a second. Do you have a round in the chamber? Now, this happened in a split second, so you need to use a bit of imagination. But this person grabs the weapon literally at this angle and pulls the trigger. And obviously, what goes off? A shot. If we analyze this story superficially, we could simply say that this person made a mistake in the unloading sequence of the weapon and didn't realize that they had loaded the weapon, and so a shot was fired. But if we look in detail, we'll notice that this small incident, which luckily ended with just a shot into one of the side barriers of the shooting range, reveals a problem of attitude towards the firearm. If we perform the same action repeatedly when we're in a stressful situation where we won't be thinking, we'll do that thing. And if we get used to, during the unloading of our weapon, at a certain point having to pull the trigger, often quickly, like many people do sooner or later, it'll happen to us too. We will make a mistake in some way because, of course, it never happens to us. It always happens to others. But someone will get this sequence wrong and pull the trigger randomly when the weapon is loaded. The problem with this sequence is that this person saw a weapon in a condition where I, as a shooting instructor, would say, "Look, the weapon is loaded." He saw the cocked firing mechanism. And his first thought, the instinctive thought, was to pull the trigger, because in the unloading sequence that this person had always done, the last step was pressing the trigger, regardless of the condition of the weapon. You understand that there's a difference between simply unloading the weapon and pulling the trigger, and when I've unloaded the weapon, I aim, point at the target, and shoot at it. It's a matter of mental boundaries. I can't associate pulling the trigger with unloading the weapon. You only and exclusively pull the trigger when you aim at the target with the intention of hitting it. That's the only time we can put our finger on the trigger. So even I who know right now that the weapon is unloaded, if I'm firing to unload, I have to aim at the target or a safe area, and only then can my finger go on the trigger. Question: what would you do if your firing mechanism is cocked and maybe you can't aim at the target? Maybe you're using the weapon for self-defense. What would you do in this situation? Honestly, a weapon like that can stay like this. There's no need to pull the trigger. Don't do test trigger pulls. There's no such thing as a test trigger pull. What exists is aiming at the target and shooting. It's a bit strange for me to have to make these videos. The strange thing isn't really explaining these things. I'm a shooting instructor. It's my job. But think about the beginning, when I unloaded that, now you understand, involved a test trigger press. It wasn't correct because I pulled the trigger without aiming at the target. It's a bit strange to have to make these safety mistakes to show you the correct procedure. Forgive me if this seems a bit hypocritical right now, because up until now we've been saying be careful with your attitude. Be mindful of the safety culture. Don't fall into the trap of thinking it happens to others, but not to me. But also remember that I'm a shooting instructor, and sometimes I have to do small things to prove it. Maybe to my students or to you a bit today, even today, my online students, what is the correct attitude, the correct behavior with firearms? My final point is a bit of an appeal. Sometimes appeals end up in vain, but if even just one person listens to it, hears it, I'm happy. I think that what I do, talking about firearms on the web, serves a purpose. Firearms, besides being my job, are my great passion, as you surely know. And the idea that maybe I've helped someone, it makes me happy. It really makes me happy to share this passion, a passion that, however, needs to be approached with the right steps. Because it's a dangerous passion and we can't deny it. And this is my appeal. If you see someone, whether it's a friend, a colleague, if you go to a quarry, a shooting range, a shooting club, and you see behavior that isn't safe, say something. And if no one reacts to this, leave that place. Because when you read that a person, a gun owner, a police officer, a security guard shoots their nephew while cleaning a firearm, it's also your fault. It's also your fault because, for example, you gave your business and your money to a place that wasn't safe in the first place. And I know that sometimes it's expensive, it's a pain to maybe go farther where they're stricter about certain safety behaviors, but safety and a culture of safety are something we all create together. And if you prefer to go to a place that lets you do whatever the hell you want, instead of going to a place where the rules are followed, then you're part of the problem. You're part of that world of firearms that makes it less safe, not safer. Guns are dangerous. The correct number of gun accidents is 0. That's all from me for today. And as always, I'll see you next time.